Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Brian Escow Show. So much going on in the world. Really, I wish I was doing more of these. You know, the peace deal. I mean, congratulations, Trump, and all the parties involved. Hopefully that sticks. It's pretty incredible. But every day it seems like there's something amazing going on, some interesting development. And these times are so polarized. So I wish I could be contributing more, and I hope to in the near future. But I'm a little busy. I have my new job and I'm getting married in literally 3 weeks. So it's a very exciting time for me. And so I'm happy to be able to check in with you when I can. And definitely looking forward to exploring this question of what do I think of Nick Fuentes and what he represents in terms of the political dynamic. It's been something that I've been wanting to do for a while. And since Nick just did an interview with Patrick Bet David, the big podcaster, PBD host, which was great. I was going to do it following just listening to that and doing just a little bit of research, but I got delayed about a week and a half, and I'm so glad that I did because Nick just made an appearance on Dave Smith's podcast, and I listened to that 3.5 interview, and so now I'm able to kind of synthesize both of those recent appearances and give you some thoughts, which I think will be helpful. So, um, looking forward to doing that. But before I do, let me just give you the quick wedding update. Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting. As I've said before, I got extremely lucky. I found an incredible woman who somehow wants to associate with me, and we seem to have a good time together. And it's just all good feelings. No cold feet. My feet are getting warmer. So feel very blessed. And, she has been doing so much of the work preparing for the wedding. I've been trying to assist and offer my support where I can, but between her and her mom, they've got it covered. And I just got to think about the music. And it's funny, music is so important to me. My dad's a musician. My relationship with my dad is so important is central to my life and has a lot to do with my search for political identity and what I'm doing now, even. Pardon, sip of tea. But music has always been a huge part of my life. I mean, in high school, I just locked myself in my room and played guitar. A lot in college too, although I had definitely had I mean, I had a social life in high school and college, but much of it was spent in my room, and that's okay. But I never really pursued it, although I enjoyed doing it immensely. Love being creative. But it was funny. I remarked the other day. I wrote a post that said something like, I never understood how people, when I used to say, people, what do you listen to? What's your favorite? And people say, I don't listen to music. That never made sense to me. How could you not listen to music? But now I get it. I've gone through this change where lately I really don't listen to music. I listen to podcasts. I'm trying to listen to an audiobook. So things change. You go through cycles, I guess, but definitely still see the value in music and art, even if I'm shifting away from that type of mindset lately for the time being, at least. So that's just one thing to say. But music. So I got to think of what are we going to dance to? What are we going to walk down the aisle to? Piano version. It's like I saw on YouTube there's a guy who does lots of wedding stuff, gives you ideas. That's how he does his channel. I'm sure he does weddings too, obviously. And he was doing a Slipknot medley, which was more beautiful than you might imagine. So look that up if you're interested. But I do love music, even if I haven't been listening lately. So let me tell you something funny. So, as I mentioned, the main topic of this episode is going to be Nick Fuentes, his ideas and his story. Obviously, not to pick on him. I don't pick on people. You know, I'll condemn people, and I will condemn some of the things Nick has said and done in this 30 minutes or so. But um, it's all meant in love and peace and truth and honesty and respect. So, with that said, like I mentioned, I've been listening to these Nick Fuentes interviews, and last week I was wrapping up the PBD interview, Patrick Bet David, and I did something that I hate. I was such a hypocrite. I cannot stand it when people are on speakerphone in public or if they're listening to music or something on speakerphone. It's just insanely rude, right? In this case, I'm walking from my apartment to the gym. I'm going down the stairs. No one's around. I certainly would immediately turn it off if I had seen someone, but I was guilty. I misplaced my headphones. And so I was walking to the gym outside and I was listening to it on speakerphone. Again, certainly not disrupting anyone. Very cognizant of that. But anyway, I go down, I go to the gym, and of course, I'm not listening while I'm working out. That would be too rude. But I'm walking back from the gym and I'm listening again. I'm walking back up the stairs and I come from the stairwell into the corridor. And at the very, very, very end of the interview, it was about a 90-minute thing. So you probably don't know, but people who are familiar with PBD know that he has some app or business called Min Connect or Minect or something where influencers you can pay influencers to engage with you. It's great business model, great idea, right? Why not have direct access to some of the brightest minds? It's a great idea. And so apparently, so they wrapped up the interview and they had clearly cut a post interview audio commercial. And it wasn't discussed in the interview, but clearly Patrick had decided to allow Nick to join Min Connect or whatever the hell it's called. And so the interview's over. And I'm thinking, I see there's 10 seconds left of audio space on the episode. So I'm still listening to it. I walk up out of the stairs innocently, and I'm thinking there's going to be some random commercial, whatever. I'm not thinking twice of it. And all I know is as soon as I open the door to the hallway, I hear this voice from my phone. Hi, I'm Nick Fuentes. And it was just, and then he goes into, you just heard me get interviewed by Patrick Bet David. And I want you to know that I'm on Min Connect and blah, blah, blah. And so at the very end of the hallway, a black neighbor of mine, who I don't know any of my neighbors, but a black man is at the far end of the corridor, and he turns his head, and all he hears is, "Hi, I'm Nick Fuentes," and I'm like, "Oh no, this guy thinks I'm like listening to Nick Fuentes on the regular." So it was really funny. Um, I just thought I would start with that, a little humor to break the ice. All right, another sip of tea before I get going here. So also, I want to say before I analyze both of those interviews that Nick did and share my thoughts on him. I want to say a word about Dave Smith. Um, I'm a fan of Dave Smith. I understand. I don't agree necessarily with Dave Smith on everything, but he's read more books than I have. And I'm not saying that I agree with him on his Israel critiques. In fact, I don't. But I respect Dave Smith. And I think he's a very valuable contributor to the general political discourse in our country. I'm not going to lie about that. And I'll tell you my little Dave Smith story. Alexa, my fiance, and I, so we're getting married on November 2nd. November 4th will mark 2 years together. November 4th was our first date in 23. And our first date was dinner downtown San Diego and a Dave Smith comedy show. And at the time, I'd booked the tickets. I didn't know who Dave was really. I think I'd heard of him. Like, oh, I knew he was a very active on Twitter, libertarian comedian, and I thought he was cool. And that's about all I knew of him. We went to the show. We had a great. I mean, it was like a magical first date, right? So it was. We're gonna have a positive memory of it. The show was good. Robbie, I think Robbie Bernstein is the opening act. He was absolutely hilarious. Dave was funny and insightful, and I liked him. I said this was great. And I said on Twitter, "Oh, saw the Dave Smith show last night. Blah blah." Had a great, and he followed me, so that was really cool. So he still follows me, which is great. So I like people who are honest, who speak their minds, who are critical, who are willing to speak truth to power. And not everyone gets everything right all the time, but when you're doing that, I think generally speaking, I'm going to like you until you do something dishonest or disingenuous or cruel. And Dave Smith, I might not agree with all of his conclusions, but he hasn't done anything, he hasn't done anything like that. So therefore, he's a guy that I respect. So, and I have all these notes here. I could have spent more time trying to put this all into a master plan, but I'm just going to speak. Okay. I have all these notes from the interview Nick did with PBD. and then some notes that of the Dave one. And the bottom line here with the PBD one, Patrick did a great job. And this is kind of what I like to do when I interview people. I was going to go on a tangent. Oh, okay, I'll go on the briefest tangent. When I first started podcasting 4 years ago, this kid who was several years younger than me, but really into tech, it's automate. Everything was automated. He goes, "Yeah, I do like 12 podcasts a week or more. AI sets it up. They say, all I do is show up and say, 'What's your story?'" And so I said, "That is, dude, you think you're going to be a good podcast host?" The irony of that is ultimately, yeah, you do just want to get people's story, right? And as corny of a way to host a podcast as that is, if you just did that, you'd probably actually have a good podcast, because so many times the host wants to get their 2 cents in, or they distract from just really getting to know the guest. That's why Howard Stern is such a good interviewer. In this case, Patrick did a great job of just saying, "Nick, let's get your story. Take me through it. You're 16 years old. You make this controversial statement. Then this person retweets you. And then you get into this public relations battle and you don't want to back down. And they're not backing down. And then the next thing we're all up here, and you're this neo Nazi. Who are you? What are you? What do you really believe?" And it was a really good, he did a really good job of doing that. And I guess just scanning my notes about that, I guess I could just say, well, geez, where are those notes? That doesn't matter. Just like I said, okay, here's the bottom line. Nick is a very smart, very talented, I think very misguided, certainly not insane, but very misguided guy who is right about some things, is wrong about some things, and has gone about things in a very inappropriate way that could fairly be called dangerous at times. Um, Now, also true that it's not like he's ever, I don't believe, seriously ever called anyone to violence. And as I'll get to in listening to these interviews, it doesn't sound like he's calling for any sort of violence at this time. It sounds like he's a Christian who wants peace and love. That doesn't mean that all of his ideas are PG, are appropriate, are, I don't know, but he's not the worst of the people who have ideas that are counter to what we would consider um, liberal. And when I say liberal, I don't mean woke. I just mean in America, in an open society. And I just glanced at my notes, and I think I found the spot that I did want to get to at this point. So let me say another thing before I get right into the Nick analysis. That is that I feel like I actually have an interesting perspective on this whole discussion, because I'm an American Jew who comes from a progressive home, who studied critical race theory in law school. And after studying critical race theory and witnessing the reactions of the students in the class, and then looking around at the world around me and saying, "Whoa, I think this has really poisoned the well here in so many ways," I converted and now I voted for Trump, and now I'm this big MAGA guy. So I don't often say I have something to offer here in this conversation. I'm very much learning and at the very beginning of my political journey, but I wanted to do this episode because I do feel like I have something to say here. And so here we go. Nick Fuentes says to Patrick Bet David, "Look, man, I grew up in a baseball town. I was a precocious kid. I did a lot of reading from an early age and really started to define my political views even since I was 14 years old. Started off kind of as a libertarian. Then I started to realize, hey, my town, which he describes as the land that time forgot, in that, according to Nick, immigration didn't touch it, cultural decay didn't touch it." And so he looks around at America, Nick Fuentes does, as a teenager, and says, "Why are all these other places going to hell when the place that I grew up in was such a perfect white only community type of thing?" That's his initial pitch. And he says he starts to perceive that there is a connection between racial identity and politics and lifestyle, and he doesn't particularly like the diversity. And so he begins to pivot. As I said, he was initially more of a libertarian. He begins to pivot from more of an individualistic worldview to a more nationalistic worldview. And then, and I'm just going to go through these. He believes America first has tension with uh, Israel. Our politicians put Israel first. Certainly became part of his analysis. He just ends up going down this road where he combines two issues that he latches onto, which is cultural decay, which largely he's right about, and we'll talk about that, and Jewish influence on American politics. Um, he combines those two in a way. That's where I think he's misguided. Of course, there is a Jewish presence in American politics, and right now, it's being discussed openly, and it's in flux, and it's up for debate on whether that's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing. But certainly, we can all agree that there is a Jewish lobby, right? But Nick, I think his fatal flaw was combining his analysis that there is such a thing as a Jewish lobby with, hey, wait a minute, why is America going to hell? And I just don't agree with him on that at all. So we'll get into that more, but let me go on here. I didn't realize, and I learned this in the PBD interview. See, little old me, I'm so ignorant. I just watched the mainstream media up until recently, and I had no idea really what was going on in politics outside of the mainstream. And I had no idea that Nick Fuentes had such a war with Charlie Kirk. That was the Groyper War. I know Groypers are the Nick Fuentes followers. And when I decided to vote for Trump, my whole thing was to say, hey, look, I think I see this clearly. MAGA is just fighting the woke left. MAGA just wants to return to constitutional colorblind norms. Yes, there is this Groyper woke right Nick Fuentes faction, but it's 5%, whereas the woke left is a much larger percentage of the left. Therefore, they're the much bigger concern. I'm not going to worry about this woke right Groyper stuff. That's not what Trump is. That's not what MAGA is. I recognize that. Boom, I'm voting for Trump. All the while, I didn't realize that there was this Groyper war playing out. Whether it's 5% to 10%, whatever, the youth, the young white men, Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes were battling for them. And I just had no idea. I became aware of who Charlie Kirk was, in the last year online, as we all were during the election. But I had no idea they were battling for the hearts and minds of young white America. I did not know that. So I learned that. And so Nick is a guy who has very strong controversial views, okay? And he was apparently recorded secretly when he was like 17 years old, asked a question about interracial marriage, and his answer was, look, I think it's degenerate. And that went viral. And what else happened? So people try to crush him. And so now you have this situation where, yeah, okay, it was clearly wrong to say that, and it's wrong to believe that. But should you destroy a 17-year-old's life for something that he says that he thought was in private? And beyond that, now that you have this little war ratcheting it up, and the kid's stubborn, and he says, "Fuck you! I'm not bowing down to you if you're going to play me like that." So he just feeds into it. Now he's saying more racist shit and anti-Semitic shit from time to time in clips and online, and he's provoking and he's provoking, and they're saying, and they're going to attack and attack and attack. And he points out, and this is where I got to be honest. Nick threw a pretty good haymaker on this point. Nick goes, people blocked me out of polite society, literally prevented me from being able to have a bank account, make a living, and all of this. But then Ben Shapiro writes an article, 2014, whenever it was, about calling for an ethnic cleansing of the West Bank and Gaza. And he goes, why don't people bring that up to Ben Shapiro at every appearance he makes? So there's something to be said about that. Now, in Ben Shapiro's defense, Ben Shapiro is not making bombastic statements like Nick Fuentes has been. So, Nick, in some sense, you're making the bed that you're in. but there is a point there, and so I want to acknowledge that. What else? Yeah, I'm wondering if I should just go into the Dave Smith interview. It was good. It was interesting to hear basically them talk about how they're not allies per se, but they're united in their opposition to the Israeli government as it is constituted now and has been operating in the last several years. Dave Smith is not necessarily opposed to Israel, but he's no fan of um, recent behavior. Let's just put it that way, of the Israeli government, and neither is Nick Fuentes. And they represent different factions of the Israel critical new media, and they are on the rise. There's no doubt about it. They're blowing up. These people are getting big numbers on their views, and they're astute analysts in so many ways. And it was interesting. One of the first things they started talking about was Dave said, I think the Groypers were the most honest expression of the Trump moment. And that's so interesting because Dave didn't vote for Trump in 2016 or 2020, but he did vote for Trump in 2024. Nick voted for Trump in 16 and 20, but not 24. I mean, for me, I didn't vote for Trump in 16 or 20, but I did in 24. But Dave said the Groypers were the most honest expression of the Trump moment. And Nick goes into this pretty interesting analysis of how you could see how, from Nick's perspective, Trump was this white identity racial comeback to the woke left. And I think Nick has been very disappointed to find that Trump is not a white racial identitarian, as they call it, but more just like I said, wants to return to neutral constitutional principles. Sorry, Nick, Trump is not a Groyper. You're a Groyper, and there's a lot that you like about Trump's platform. But when you realize, oh, that's not what Trump is about, you know, so it was interesting to hear Dave say that he thought that was the most honest expression of the Trump moment. Maybe at that time I agreed, and that's why I didn't vote for Trump. But things have changed, obviously. Interestingly, um, Nick said, and I guess it's not directly related to that previous point, but he goes, maybe the movement, Nick saying that I lead, would have taken a different direction if there was more engagement rather than threats and censorship. So it's not to defend Nick's comments, his inflammatory comments, okay? But if, generally speaking, people had, instead of just pouring the cement on him and trying to bury him and lock him away, if you had engaged with him, maybe, and I'm a believer in we got to talk to each other, and I'm a believer in platforming people with hateful, dangerous views, because if you're right and they're wrong, then why shouldn't you take the opportunity to have that conversation? Right? I mean, look, these are controversial statements, really, when you think about it. But no, I'm on the side of free speech and engagement. So that resonated with me. So again, not to defend the things that Nick said, maybe out of immaturity or anger or true feeling, some combination of all of it, or sarcasm or this and that. But he said some things that are regrettable, and he will have to deal with the social consequence, and he has. So, is there a point in time, you know, I guess skipping to the end here, I don't think Nick should necessarily be cast out forever. I think we need to engage. And if he's willing to say, which he clearly is, no violence, no war, but serious conversation, yes, then I think that's someone worth bringing into the fold. And so, actually, Nick said in the Dave interview, I hope that there's introspection on the left because it could get a whole lot worse, right? So Nick says it's about power sharing. How do we share power? And in Nick's mind, he's talking about races. How do white people, now that we are, I say we, isn't that funny? I'm Jewish. I'm speaking as Nick, right? How do we as white people share power now that we're in the minority? This is Nick's driving force. And I'll tell you, it's interesting for me because I took critical race theory and I learned very clearly that it is about power sharing. The critical race entire premise is that white culture predominates America, even though the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. We're a colorblind society on paper, but in effect, we are still a white society. And so we, the critical race theory movement, have to do everything we can in Congress and judicial branch in the executive to undo the system and change it radically. No joke. That is the language in the definition of the term, a radical transformation of the system into something that is more equitable for Black people, for all people, but is not slanted towards straight white men in particular, but white people certainly. And that is controversial to say, right? Sip of tea. So, my God, Nick is not entirely wrong when he says there is a battle unfolding in our country for control, and it does have something to do with racial identity. And so my thing has been to say, hey, man, this is where I feel like a kinship with Dave Smith because he's from the libertarian strand, individualism. Hey, bro, fuck the woke left shit. But that doesn't mean you mirror it and turn into your own identity group. And now I understand your instinct to do that because in your mind, Nick, it's a reasonable thing. Hey, it's a self-defense mechanism. We're being attacked, which I agree with, frankly. White people are in some sense, and white culture is in some sense being attacked by critical race theory. Now it's being reversed, thank goodness. But you can understand why someone might feel that way. But for me, for whatever reason, the experiences that I've had, my reaction is to say, hey, dude, let's fight for individualism, for an America where we're united not by white racial politics, but by constitutional principles. And there, that's really it. So, next point here. Nick said there needs to be an uncomfortable coming together of people who recognize each other's grievances, but he's not optimistic. And he's right about that. He's right about that. So, what I'm hearing from Nick is a willingness to enter a more reasonable space. If this is what you're saying, this is fine. This is fine. But it's the other stuff, it's the toxic baggage. And Dave called him out on this. And so it was actually a really good conversation. I highly recommend you listen to it. Listen to the PBD interview if you want to get Nick's a little bit of a backstory into how he thinks. I think it's very important you listen to both. And then the Dave thing for the last several years of how the debate has played out and how the relationships are between Nick and all of the other people on the um, Israel critical new media side. It's very interesting because Dave says, "Hey man, people call you a Fed. They accuse you of being a Fed because you on January 6th, you spoke through the loudspeaker, go into the Capitol, and you didn't get charged. Well, there's something there, everyone says. But beyond that, you're like driving a wedge. You're beefing with Candace. You're beefing with Tucker. And people would say, and not only that, you're bringing all this toxic baggage, the anti-Semitic stuff, the racist stuff, to the critical Israel critical stuff. One could say, "Hey, are you trying to poison this critical Israel critical movement?" And Nick said, "Look, I could see how one might think that, but he went on to say, "Hey, this is why I'm beefing with Tucker. This is why I'm beefing with Candace, and about the toxic stuff. Um, look, I think Nick he hasn't yet made an apology. I don't know that he's going to apologize because he's been through so much. That's the thing. So, and I'm not saying that voids his responsibility or that he shouldn't apologize. I don't know that he's going to apologize. I don't know if I'm going to ever get to a place where I can get on board with the guy. But I hope that he does. And if he does, I'd certainly be willing to, you know, as a guardian of polite society, welcome him in. But he's not there yet. But I'd like to see that happen. What else can I tell you? Yeah, Nick really he's so focused on Jewish identity and white identity. And it's also interesting to me because, again, studying critical race theory and growing up, kind of feeling torn between certain parts of my family who are more aligned with their Jewish identity, to other parts of my family who are less aligned with their Jewish identity. And I'm an American. I mean, I was born in New Jersey. What can I tell you? Nonetheless, there is a Jewish identity is powerful, and the Holocaust does leave a very powerful imprint on all Jews, and that's fine to acknowledge. The question is that Jewish identity um, a corrosive force on America? And I don't think it is. What I will say though is you can point to many Jewish people who are on the left who do support critical race theory. And to that extent, you just say, "Hey, look, it's fair to call people out, but do it on an individual basis. Don't Not all black people support critical race theory, not all Jewish people support critical race theory." That's the fatal mistake I think Nick has yet to um atone for. And if he does that, I think he'll be in a new world, right? So I do think it's important and valid and appropriate to recognize that we have had a shitload of immigration over the years, and it has changed the nation in some fundamental ways. Also, critical race theory has been prevalent in academia and it's trickled down through our institutions and society into media. And it has really imprinted this anti-American view, negative view. And there is a explicit and implicit dislike, disdain, hatred even for white people, white culture inherent in that. And I think that's fair. And also, the policies associated with critical race theory have led to, I think, increased crime and increased moral decay and godlessness. I think that's fair. Now, again, it's all about the reaction. And Nick's whole thing would be to say, look, the melting pot concept of America is a failure. Look at it. That and therefore we need to crack the melting pot and just turn it into a white Christian nation. And my response would be to say, no, look, I grew up revering the melting pot. And so what we have now with critical race theory is them wanting to swap out a new pot or boil down the pot itself, evaporate the pot, get rid of the pot to where everything is just mushed and there is no unifying culture. I don't think that's right. I think we should have the melting pot. I think the melting pot does come from the people who founded it were white. White people can and should take pride in that. And everyone as an American can and should take pride in the fact that together, minorities and others have worked over the years to perfect that union and to open the doors of America to all those who are legally present, right? That's the America I believe in. I mean, it's 2025. I was born in '89. The '90s were golden years in so many ways. I know I was just a kid, but it feels like we weren't worrying about this stuff. We had gotten beyond racism in some way, and it just seems unnecessary to and unfortunate that the conversation is here now. And so Nick Fuentes is part of that, is a reaction to that. I mean, think about it. This kid came up when this CRT thing was really bubbling post Obama. It's amazing how I studied this stuff at a time where it's just peaking. I mean, really, DeSantis and oh man, it was all over the news, in the national news, right as I was studying it in 21 and 22. And Nick picked up on it even earlier than that because he was paying attention to politics. And it was just after people say Obama brought it in. I don't know. Maybe in hindsight, he had something to do with it. But I never saw Obama as this this usherer of the CRT movement, but it does seem to have followed him in so many ways. And now, Nick, think about it. He was kind of born in that environment and he went to the extreme. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. And I don't think his answers are correct. Um, I think it's okay to have pride in being white. I think it's okay 100%. Just like, I mean, I think we should all be able to coexist in America. I mean, it's crazy that this has to be said. That's why it's so mind blowing. It's like, I guess I have a valuable perspective here to say that we should all live in peace and coexist. But what does that mean? What does it mean to coexist? And there is a structure to our society. And that means there is a basic level of assimilation that everyone will have to do to live here. Okay. And so that doesn't mean that we can protect every baseball park from staying a baseball park and we can't protect everything from change. Right. But, you know, we got to find a way to live in peace, and it shouldn't be that hard. But somehow we've gotten to this point, and I guess I don't know what else to say about it other than I hope we have dialogue with each other. It's important to. I think we need to, because, like Nick said, he's not he's concerned that this is going to get worse. This is going to get worse. We are in a pendulum swinging extremist environment right now, and that's why I think it's very important that these conversations happen. It's why I wanted to do this. I like I said, I didn't really, as you can tell, put my notes into some coherent thing. I just said, let me just turn the mic on and share some thoughts. I hope you are picking up where I'm coming from. I think might not have been the most elegant episode, but I think I got it across. So thank you all for tuning in. We've got some great guests lined up, and I'm getting married soon. But after that, I look forward to being here more regularly and sharing my thoughts. And congratulations again to Trump. And let's hope this peace agreement sticks. Absolutely historic times, right? Unbelievable times. I'm glad to be navigating it with you. I'll see you next time. Later.